So we're away. Thanks for joining us. And so Hamish Galloway, he's getting really super quality with his dairy cows. And I wanted to share this with our Southern Regen group. But first, I want to make some introductions about Hamish and his group up in Hawke's Bay. So I'm going to share some slides, and then we'll go into slides on Hamish's property as well. So I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully everybody can see Hamish there with a big cloud of dirt that he dug up at the Dairy NZ discussion group field day just about a month ago. And it was really cool. Mark will think it's cool, all the dreadlocks clinging to the roots there, you know, the lovely soil aggregates. But one thing that you can't see, but we could smell, is just a beautiful earthy smell in that soil. Okay. So there's a pretty strong regenerative Hawke's Bay group up there of farmers basically teaching each other how to farm. So Hamish is rubbing shoulders with some real heavyweights in the regenerative scene in New Zealand. So his mom there is on the left there, Rose. Next to her, from left to right, is Malcolm White, and he's there with his daughter Nikki. They took John King's holistic management course back in 2011, and a lot of you might recognize the photos I have because on almost all my presentations I show photos of the pastures on their farm with the incredible diversity and big huge leaves. So a lot of experience there. And then next to Nikki is John Camp. You know, for over 20 years, he's been buying farms, doing them up, and letting those farms teach him about regenerative farming. And he's come to the conclusion that from now on in, he's going to put all his resources into infrastructure to make the mob grazing easier. And then once all that's sorted and his staff can easily get the cows where he wants them and move them off in easily, then he'll think about things like fertilizers or, you know, effective microbes, all that kind of stuff. But first, he's setting the groundwork to make things work smoothly, which I think is pretty wise. So I first met Hamish. He came to one of my pasture recovery planning group meetings, and that was 2 winters ago in 2020 in August. And I was back up to see his farm this year in July, and I could not believe the quality in his pastures. And it wasn't just the odd regress pasture. It seemed like the whole farm had just incredible quality and that beautiful smelling soil, and really knocked my socks off. We did a pasture walk at his farm, and I think he taught farmers quite a bit, and I'm hoping he can share the same things with you. So he farms with his mom, Rose, his dad, Sandy, his wife, Michelle, and 3 children are on the farm, of course. 520 cows, 200 hectares. They've been on the farm since 2003. And the emphasis since then has been taking care of the soil. And I'll let him get into those details. There's Mom Rose at the Dairy NZ discussion group meeting last month. Yeah, she's actively, you know, playing a role on the farm on a daily basis as well. And I just want to go through some of the slides showing the pasture that I saw that day in November, which is the time of the year when pretty much every ryegrass plant in New Zealand wants to go to seed on the same day. And that's why the quality here is pretty amazing. And Hamish will explain how he's achieving that. This was the paddock they went into that night at quite a high density, and I'll let him explain exactly how he does that. Cattle were healthy. I didn't see a single lame cow. But if you look at the bottom, very thick. And one thing I noticed all throughout the farm is very little bare soil down at the base of the plants. Quite a thick, vibrant pasture. Another close-up of what those cows are eating, and very good legume component as well. And here's a cow. You can see the happy lines on. Hamish, I think I unmuted you. Can you explain about how you're achieving the quality?
Okay, I think it comes down to our winter management. It starts off, sort of late autumn, winter time. So we end up grazing. The last couple of years have been really dry, but for us, that's where we take the length of the grass or the sward down to get the quality. And we also carve quite early for here. It's, we've been, last couple of years, we've carved around the 12th of July, which is probably about 3 weeks earlier than a lot of us or a lot of the other dairy farmers in the area. So we do utilise a feed pad, which we do grow, or we have done, grow maize, and we feed lucerne on to protect the soil in the winter months. So we use that quite a bit through the wetter time of the year, just to look after the soil. So we actually were milking 900 cows back in 2004, and we ended up building it's a 1,000 cow feed pad. So we've actually got a large lump of concrete for us to utilise with 520 cows. So they're pretty well spread out on there for about four hours a day during the winter, which also helps our nutrient budget with the council. So I can give you a bit of a rundown with the farm. Shall I start talking about the farm, Siobhan?
Yes, please. That'd be great.
So I'll give a little bit of a rundown. I was share milking around New Zealand, or the Waikato. I spent 3 years in the Waikato, as well as Woodville, and I've also worked down in Southland I was only down there for 6 or 7 months after I finished school. Lived in Ireland as well for a couple of years. That's where I met my wife, Michelle. And every time I've worked on different farms, it sort of opens your mind on different farms and different way that I've had, bosses have done things. So in 2003, we bought this farm. It's dead flat. It's got a couple of little river terraces, but it's predominantly free draining soil. And we certainly, right from the word go, we realised when we started farming it that we had a soil issue with compaction. The roots went down about 50 mils, and then they went sideways. They could not penetrate down any further. And I think some of it was continued cropping when potatoes were being grown and barley, because it's so flat. This is before it was made into a dairy farm or converted in 1991. And the owners before us with the dairy farm used to roll for grass scrub every single year with a heavy roller, which just compacted the soil even more. So it sort of made the issue, or compounded the issue. But in that first year, we really struggled. We were the first farm to go dry. Sort of probably mid-January we were dry, and we also had problems with cows wanting to actually eat the pasture. They would go into some of the paddocks and they would be straight out again. They just hated the taste of what it was. So it was palatability was a big issue. And then once we got to March, we got hit with grass scrub, and it just wiped us out. 80% of the farm with grass scrub. So there's a bit of an idea where we were, and then we just had to build a bit of a story and learn what the soil was teaching us and why we were in this position that we were in. And luckily enough, I had a couple of good friends that were in the system, or were in a soil-friendly system. That was Kevin Davidson and Peter Barry, late Peter Barry, which was the neighbour. And we got on to learning about soils and what makes up the soil and what drives a healthy soil. So in the early days back, I think it was about 2006, we started with Abron, and they started digging holes. Phyllis was also part of that back in those days, and we started digging a lot of holes and reading what the soil was and what it was telling us. So we had a really blocky soil. You could dig down to the bottom of the spade to the sort of a reddish clay that we have here, and you could smell herbicides in that sort of red clay, and it would just odor up. It was horrible, and we'd be lucky to see upworm in there. So we started by applying, it was a digested calcium, because we went to a couple of Ard and Anderson courses when he first came to New Zealand, and he kept driving that calcium was king and base saturation. So we went down that track of filling basically an empty soil, being volcanic, and filling up the base saturation. So we started around, our calcium base saturations were all sort of down around that low 40s. So it was quite an empty soil, and that's why we were high P retention as well. We've got P retention levels of 97, 98% here. So to free up a lot of that, we've got to add to get the calcium in, which frees up, just basically fills our empty bucket. So from a regen point of view, this is where our main aim has been up until probably about 4 years ago, is basically correcting and getting base saturations up to fill up our empty soil. So I don't know if everyone understands how the base saturations work, but you basically got an empty bucket, and the more you fill it up with your main 4 drivers of calcium to magnesium, they're your 2 ratios. We work on 7.4 calcium to 1 magnesium, and then you've got your potassium to sodium, or sodium to potassium ratio. So when you get those sort of in line, and you put on, calcium, you've got to be really careful. You don't alter the balance. So we end up putting a little bit of magnesium. It was supertine was one thing we used to balance with while we could get it, but now we're using a little bit of dolomite every sort of 3rd year to balance the lime that we've got here. And luckily we're only 10 minutes away from a good lime source of Hartuma. So anyway, they're the 4 drives that we've worked on since 2006, and we used to test our base saturations. We were sort of, when we first started, base saturations were down at 3. And we wanted to be, we were told that sort of, early to mid teens were where we wanted to be in time, and we actually saw quite a big improvement quite early on by adding calcium and balancing soils. We sort of went from 3 to 8. We sort of sat at 8 for a while, and then you get another couple of years of good growth and working that calcium into the soil, and then we popped up into double figures. And it does affect quite a bit how much you crush the sap in the plant when you're doing bricks testing, and if it's got a bit of moisture in place, or how much nitrogen you've used. But you slowly, as you build them in correct soil, you naturally get a release and balance, and you find the cows will actually want to eat what they've got in front of them. Doesn't matter if it's a little bit rank, but they just want to, chase that taste of the sugar that you're producing.
And what fertilizers have you applied this year?
So this year we've been using, I've actually only used, up until November, we'd only used 16 units in. We still use a little bit of nitrogen to drive growth, but only in small amounts. So through the winter, I got into fish. It was something we did some trials in the autumn with some half paddocks of fish at 20 litres. And we actually found those half paddocks were phenomenally better as we got into early spring. The root growth and the amount of roots that had developed, and the amount that the soils were opening up or just aggregating, even though we've been on a biological type program using and balancing soils, we saw a massive increase in what was happening under the soil with fish. So then we actually used, we've been using Fish It from Invercargill, and we did a couple of applications, or one major application of 30 in the spring, and then every foliar fert that we use, because we liquefy everything that we're putting on. We've been running 5 litres per round since we've been getting a lot of moisture, and it's it's quite actively perfect conditions really to develop fungi in the soil. So fungi is one of those things that I think you got to look after your soils, look after that mycorrhiza and all the other fungi, because it's a crucial element of what helps release a lot of the phosphate and root growth. And it also with the mycorrhizal fungi, it works with the plant roots. It takes the exudates that the plant's producing with sugar, and it feeds the fungi and all the microbes and everything in the soil. So that's where we're at with
is that the reason for minimizing soil disturbance?
Yes. So we used to do a fair bit of cropping on the farm, but as we're getting, well, every year we're doing less and less. This year we've only drilled 16 hectares of a sort of a summer diverse crop in our worst paddocks, but 6 of it we direct drilled. We still find we have to do a little bit of soil disturbance if we've got a compaction layer, which we're still fighting with in some of the runoff area that we lease. But yeah, it's certainly the less disturbance you do, the more you look after less herbicides and pesticides and fungicides that people use, the more I think you look after the fungi. The fungi is so important.
I agree. And Dylan had a question he had sent. What is your secret to the good trampling? I'm going to advance ahead to some of your residual photos. And so this is the paddock the cows were in the day I was up there. There weren't a whole lot of seed heads, but they did seem like they were laying it down and they were staying down. And how do you achieve that?
I think we've been running diverse mixes quite early on, and since we've been here, we used to regrass with ryegrass and clovers and the traditional ryegrass and clover mixes that a lot of dairy farmers use, but they wouldn't last. They would be eaten out by grass scrub within 4 years, and if you're unlucky, it would be even earlier than that. So we started using diverse mixes back in 2007. We did quite large areas. I'd even regrass in the springtime, and we still had some ryegrass. We were using, I think it was about 15 kilos of matrix in with chicory, plantain, red and white clovers, prairie grass, cocksfoot. Cocksfoot's something that loves the soil that we've got, so we actually put a lot of cocksfoot in. Now, and lucerne, we've got lucerne in our sward as well. So since we've gone down a more of a diverse mix, and since I've met Siobhan, we were probably lucky that we had 90% of the farm in quite a diverse pasture mix, and I think that's one thing that's helped us to transition on to this next level grazing of Siobhan's, is that they're quite happy to lay down in the spring. So I was a bit worried at the start we couldn't get them to lay down in November, but I think one of the takes that I've got is you don't panic about that. You just, if you're grazing the system, they will lay down, and we saw that in sort of 20th of November to, in December, they're starting to lay down quite easily. They just want a bit of trampling, they just lay down, and the cows eat just the leaf, and the more they're having to work and compete with the other animals or their peers, the more trampling they do. So, and we've got quite a high legume, the large amount of legumes in our pastures, so they're actually getting a lot of high quality protein, and a lot of the time we just need to balance that with a bit of extra fibre for the cows to chew.
And how many shifts a day?
It varies. If it's as we go through the more dominant cocksfoot paddocks, I found I almost do 4 shifts during the day. During the day is easy, so I actually target some of my worst, or wouldn't say worst paddocks, the ones that need more trampling with the high cocksfoot dominant pastures. So I actually found with 500 cows to about 0.7 of a hectare, and it's much easier to do those paddocks during the day because you're free, and because we haven't done a lot of topping, well, no topping yet, but we're about to start doing a little bit to surround the small paddocks that have a little bit of wireweed and Kelly's I'll just top those while we're getting a bit of moisture. So I quite often do 3 shifts, 3 to 4, depending on the paddock during the day. And then after milking, I'll shift them about, I go out about 8 o'clock, just wind the fence up. And yeah, so 2 shifts from when they're milked in the afternoon, through the evening, just 2 shifts. So that's 5 to 6 a day through November, December, and then as the quality comes back, which it is, because we've just gone through a bit of extra seed head, but there's still a lot of quality still in the paddock. We'll probably lessen it to maybe just 1 shift in the daytime and maybe 1 at night. But if we're going out or have to be somewhere and there's no one to shift, they'll just choose a slightly better paddock for those evening shifts so that they have the whole thing, just so it works for us rather than having to be tied to shifting all the time.
Yeah, because 5 or more shifts a day probably wouldn't be sustainable for the whole year, but I think it will pay big dividends in that November, December, or even end of October time when you're setting the quality and reducing those seed heads that do escape.
And I think the other thing is it builds appetite for us with cows. We're trying to build appetite. So every time you wind the fence up, the cows know they're getting a shift and they'll rush into the next break and they'll eat just like at Christmas time. You might have a Christmas lunch and then you have a Christmas dinner, and then when you get to the end of Christmas dinner, you're full, then out comes the dessert and you're basically just filling them up again, and sometimes they can hardly walk to the cow shed because they're so full. They're full, these cows, by the time they get to be milked.
Well done.
One thing, dividing paddocks up, we've still got a few biggish paddocks, and certainly longer, skinnier paddocks are much easier to walk a fence across, 70 metres compared to a couple of 100 metres with some of the ones that we haven't divided. But we haven't got many of those slightly bigger, 6 hectare paddocks left. But we are going to fence in the summer to make it easier, and we can put a lot more pressure on areas in the farm.
And you said you haven't done much topping. Do you think you'll have to do much this year?
No, last year I had to do about 20 hectares total because there was the odd cocksfoot paddock. It developed a bit of rust and the cows did not want to eat it. I tried my best to get through it, but I ended up having to, top them, and then they came away, and because they weren't eating and they had seed heads and the cows didn't want to eat them. As soon as I topped them, the amount of growth that I got from those last year made up for it. But I think this year we've foliar fed a lot of calcium nitrate, just 15 kilos. We've done about 2.5 rounds of calcium nitrate. Calcium is the main driver of leafy pastures and reducing seed head. They use a lot of it in the hawk world. So 15 kilos of calcium nitrate's only like 3 units in, but if we use that with a little bit of fish and we use fulvic acid in conjunction with that, it just promotes leaf. You hardly get a lot of seed head and the clovers love it. So from about start of October through to 10th, it wasn't even the 10th, first week in December, we run calcium nitrate, and it makes a huge difference. It's something we've learned over the last 10 years. We were sort of, with the tow and fert, we've just got our own homemade tow and fert thing, but tow and fert are only made 20 minutes away from us, and we were one of the people they came and talked to when they were first developing their own one. So yeah, it's foliar feeding for us is a big winner.
So they stole your ideas.
Yeah.
When I was there, I was pretty amazed about how few seed heads there were because it was November. I thought you were doing really well there. Dylan did have a question. He wanted to know if you make as much supplement on the milking platform as you used to.
So the answer is no. The last few years we've been growing a little bit of maize, but now this year I think maize is quite hard on the soil. I'd rather let someone else damage their farm with the pre-emerges and the power harrowing they use to grow maize. So now we're just trying to run a big platform of just everything is grazable, even our summer pastures or summer diverse crops that we're putting in. That's the first time we've done that this year, but it was just to try and transition some paddocks that had cooch in it, which has become there's probably 15 hectares of paddocks that had cooch in it. They've been dominating the ryegrass paddocks that we've got in them, and it was just a trial for us, but at the moment hopefully it's just a temporary measure and we can just get back to regrassing and keeping them in just diverse grasses and legumes. Certainly makes it easier the more area you have out of crop, and it's cheaper too.
And costs are not going down, are they?
No, they're not.
They seem to be skyrocketing. Can you tell us a little more about this summer crop? Because the photo looks amazing that you just sent me.
So, and this has got a lot of understory in it. It's lots of legumes. It's about 18 different things in there. We tried this sort of mix underneath the maize, so we didn't use pre-emerge. Didn't exactly work that well. It sort of dominated the maize early on. But this was planted about the 20th of October, I think it was, somewhere around there. But it's amazing how quickly it's got going. But we're going to graze it around Christmas. And then what you can see in the picture is daikon radish. That's the white flowering species in there. And there's sunflowers. And then underneath there's just a whole wad of, there's turnips. Turnips is in there too. There's a little bit of kale. So once that's grazed off, and we'll probably just take a third, not a third, probably half of what's there. A lot of it will get trampled in. I think we'll probably get another 3 or 4 grazings, and then we'll drill in oats and Italian. I haven't exactly worked out what we're going to do in the autumn yet. If we put anything, I'd like to put a lot of mixed species in there, but we're just got to make sure it's going to strike and to get good bang for buck out of it.
Mm-hmm. Well done. So I'm going to stop my share so that we can bring other people in who might want to ask some questions. So we did answer some of the questions as we went along. So I'm going to go ahead and ask people to unmute. So Mark, did you have any questions? Any further questions? We'll work our way down the line.
Yeah, thanks Hamish and Siobhan for spending a bit of time with us. We really appreciate it. So I was just going to ask a question on round length with your taller grazing now. What sort of round lengths throughout the season are you working with?
So, Mark, what we've been working on, and while everything's growing fast in the spring, we've been on a 21-day round. Last year, it was a little bit hard to get out longer than that, when we wanted to, because we had, it was a little bit dry early on. But it seems to be the key is to either be on a 25-day sort of a round and have some that you can defer out, but the majority of it, yes, 21 days. I keep a book in my truck and write down all the paddocks where they've been grazed, so I can easy reference. But that seems to be the key thing here. It might be different in Southland because you got a bit more daylight hours than what we probably have. I remember when I was down there in Matara, it was certainly a different area to farm, but it's probably a lot like Ireland with the daylight length that you get. So I'm not sure what sort of round lengths you guys use down there, but certainly faster is better, but you still need some area to come back in to push your round out. So we sort of worked out 25 days is about the optimum. When Siobhan was here just looking at the leaf stage, we really need to be on a 25-day round 20th of November, just to get the right amount of leaves on the plant to capitalise on the extra growth that you can get with the stage growth up to, I don't know, sort of 3.5 leaves for ryegrass and 4 for cocksfoot.
And I think it is important to have a decent residual, grass behind you, so the grass will recover that quickly. Isn't that kind of part of how it knits together?
So we've actually got rain this year. So December is used to be quite typical in this area. Used to get a lot of rain in December, but this year I'm pushing out to 30 days. I'm 25 now. I'll push out to 30 days by Christmas, and 10 days, but 2 weeks we'll be up 30-day round, and then I'll start in my summer crops, which will, that'll push me out 35 to 40 by the time we hit sort of mid-January, I suppose.
Yeah, I think for February, hadn't you put on your grazing plan something like 30 to 35? Was it for February?
Yeah. Every year's different. Like a couple of years ago, we were dry by 1st of December. We had no grass left. So this year, it's a nice way to be. But that's the aim at the stage. The 30-35 by February, mid-February, and then by the time we hit the autumn, we'll be 50 odd days, because we'll take a few of the empties out of the herd that when we pre-test, that will take a bit of pressure off the farm. That answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Your farm looks highly productive. The grass, it looks amazing. Yeah. Well done.
Thanks. Yeah.
Amanda, did you have any questions?
I was just going to ask about your livestock density. Can you just say a bit more about where you started with that and how you've arrived at what you're doing now?
Okay, so livestock density is the amount of cows that we've got per hectare per shift, sort of thing. Is that what you're after, or from where we used to be?
Yeah. So when you started with that, what how have you measured whether you've got too many or too few? Yeah.
I sort of live with the cows a bit, so during the last couple of months, so I just look at how much I only want to shift every 2 hours during the day, so I sort of look how many cows, and quite often you'll shift them and then they'll eat and then sit down, and basically when they sit down, you look at the size break that they have eaten in 2 hours. A lot of them will be sitting down. That's sort of what I work on. It's how many shifts you want during the day, and then sort of look and change that for the length of time and what it looks like by the time you get to a certain time point. So to make it easier for me, because I've only got one other staff member, Cameron, and to make it simple, I sort of do it on time. So we do a shift at the end of milking, 8:30, 9 o'clock, and then the next shift will be 11:30, and then we do a final shift around 1 o'clock. So just to make it easier on a time system, so everyone knows that cows need shifting, we work on 0.8 or that length of time on a dairy system. Because our next milking is 3 o'clock, so we're really getting cows at 2:30. We're splitting up 3 hectares, 3.5 hectares during the day, and quite often they'll go to another paddock at night, maybe just graze a hectare, and then they get moved at the end of milking into the night paddock.
And sorry, just a follow-up question. I mean, like our plant density is not great, so we have been hoping to employ that density in terms of grazing to help to remediate some of our bare soil kind of challenge. Did you have that, and did it work?
Yeah, we've really, as you graze, you'll find you'll grow more tillers. So the more times you graze throughout the year, especially from the autumn through to sort of November, your plant actually produces new tillers as well.
Yep.
So the more you graze it, the more baby tillers it will produce. So if you're keeping it all leafy and letting sunlight, those little tillers, and you're not pugging, you'll find those new tillers through the autumn and early spring, separate off the main stem of the plant. So you'll gain it there. And then I think with the system, if you're leaving a little bit of seed head as well, you'll find a lot of the seed will fall down and germinate, that sort of autumn and thicken your pastures up like that.
Hamish, just to give you an idea of the density Amanda and Jason are applying, they've got, I think, 1,700 mixed age ewes and their lambs in the lead mob, followed by 200 cows and their 200 calves. So a lot of density there. And hopefully we'll be able to share their results on a webinar like this if Amanda and Jason are willing.
That's great. So Amanda, another thing is, do you guys dig many holes to see what's actually happening in the soil itself? Because that's one at the time. If you're digging, especially some of your worst packs, there might be an underlining issue in the soil itself with compaction, or why the roots aren't getting down, or
I mean, when we started, we would do a water infiltration test and walk away after about 25 minutes with it not having done anything. So just massive compaction and hard capping on the soil surface.
So the other thing we looked at, like we were having big problems with our, especially when our calcium-based saturations were, 39 to 45. The thing that's made a huge difference is getting that into the 60s and early 70s. But you got to be really careful. You got to make sure you balance the calcium with a magnesium source as well. Otherwise, you can collapse the soil if you get too much calcium without balance, and then that'll compound your problem. So I'd probably look at also what's in that top 75 mil first to see what's affecting that, and then once you correct that, then look at what's at 150 mils down and just do it stage by stage and correct where the actual root zone is at the moment, then correct the next level. So the base saturations, to me, there's some of the organic guys don't agree, but I think for us that's been where we've made some big gains with, especially our soil. I'm not sure what balance you've got in the soil you've got, but I'm happy to help there if you want, me to have a look and see what's going on.
Well done, farmer to farmer learning. Juliet and Brent, did you have any questions?
No, look, I was very interested on how you're talking about getting your soils right and back into kilter and stuff, and I think we've suffered them same problems as well. So, look, just interested to sort of think about that a bit further down the track, really.
One thing we found, we added biology quite early on and didn't get a really big gain from, putting microbes and stuff like that in the early days. We actually got to, you got to make the environment with the air in it before I think you can start adding, that's, like fungi or if you're adding fish and stuff like that, you really got to correct what's there first, then you can start adding anything you want to. And I think once then you go on, or you're already in the system, I think it just drives, the momentum starts, and then it's just gets a massive amount of momentum and things start correcting themselves.
It's like dominoes.
It's
amazing.
Look, it was certainly very interesting, and well done, really. It's certainly thanks.
So I'm not against working up paddocks and making that time, do a soil test and work out if you need a lot of calcium, or, see what your main drivers are. But I'm not afraid to go and put mix a lot of good quality lime or anything in at that stage on your worst areas, and then to start nursing them. Quite often I always target my worst paddocks and correct the soils first, and then you find things just come with that. They start moving forward after, once you correct the basic issues with the soil, you'll find things. You're wanting an area that the roots are happy to penetrate. The harder the soil is, the less penetration the roots can get down. So, and worms, like the worms that we started with, you could hardly find a worm here back in 2003, but you know, we've got paddocks now that, you know, you can probably get 1.5 kilos of worms. The big huge stuff is the ones you want. They do the most shifting soil, and just look after them.
Have you found that's made a difference when you get dry as well for your pasture singing on with just
Yeah, but we went to a lot of the deep taproot type, or especially cocksfoot's grows really well on the side of the road, cocksfoot and prairie grass. So I think you got to look at what naturally grows in your area and start selecting maybe slightly better species of those, if you're doing any regrassing or anything like that, and start with what naturally grows in your area. And that way you're not fighting, or, you know, you're in a habitat that they love. I think then they flourish really well.
I recently read that the grass scrub can have an advantage when soils dry out in the summer, because if soils dry out and biology goes dormant or is reduced, there are fewer predators to gobble up the eggs that are in the soil at that time. What's your experience with the grass scrub and farina?
Okay, so around us this year, the whole area got decimated with grass scrub in this area. And I think we only had about 12 hectares total that I drilled for grass scrub, and it was my worst area. So, and we were dry like everyone else in the autumn. I actually think a lot of it, we use a lot of fulvic, so it helps, you know, stimulate the bacteria, and, you know, some bacteriums for grass scrub. But I also noticed that I think phosphate has a lot to play with, you know, available phosphate to the plant that helps with root strength as well. So yeah, I think I actually think a lot of it's phosphate, being a high P retention area. So I think worth trying. It's something I need to work on more, but I mean, we don't have too much of a grass scrub issue now, but on farms that have grass scrub issues, I'd be playing around as well with a little bit of phosphate and do half paddocks and see if that helps, because it helps with root strength, you know, phosphate does. So anyway, something to play with, but I think, yeah, that's where I'm at.
And Dylan, did we answer all your questions so far?
Yes, you did, but I've got a heap more.
Far away.
Yeah, thanks, Hamish. It's been really inspirational. I've got my team with me and they're listening in too. Just a couple quick fire ones, really. Fish it. So you buy fish it from Invercargill, and I live very close to Invercargill, and I buy it from Christfish. Can you tell me why you buy it? Is there a special reason you get it from Invercargill?
Yeah, they use whole fish. The fish it guys are using whole fish, so you're getting all the omega-3s. All the omegas are, you know, that's not they're not using what's left of the fish. Like, they don't take the fillets off and then sell you the rest. You know, you got to do your own trials, but I've always just been told you want as many different omega-3s, you know, to put on as if you're purchasing fish, to make a big difference. So we just bought a unit load up because it was the cheapest way, and started playing with that. But I think, you know, I've tried tallies as well, and I had a good result with cheaper tallies as well in the autumn. That's where I first put on 20 litres and saw a massive improvement. So I mean, that's probably the next trial. Is it just the fish it with the whole fish, or can you get away with something tallies that's more refined? So yeah, but fish has been made, and you got to feed it as well. If you're putting on all the stuff, you got to make sure you got sugars and that sort of thing there to feed the soil. Yeah,
that's really good. So your lactation period, obviously you calve really early. Do you dry off early as well to compensate, or how does that work?
Try for maximum days of milk. That's where profit is in dairy farming. So we will dry off middle of May. Even in a dry, we'll try and keep the cows going, because as soon as you dry them off, they become a major cost. You still got to feed them 12 kilos of feed, you know, as a dry cow, you know, 10 to 12 kilos, and you don't have to add a lot of extra there to keep them as a milking cow. But we still aim for, 6 to 8 weeks, of the cows have a, to be dry, because I think it's good for the udders. But I think it's important you got to weigh up how much your feed is and how much it's costing you. But quite often at the front end and at the back end are your most profitable times to put supplement in. So, yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you. Did you top a lot in the early days when you had a lot of rye? Is it just recently you stopped topping?
I used to top nearly 3 rounds. I'd start in October and just go hard for all the way to Christmas. So that's where we've come from. And used to be always, even with topping, we'd still get a drop off on the 20th of November. Didn't matter what we did. So calcium nitrates really helped. And, the less nitrogen that you use, and especially with the fish, it's really encouraged heaps of legumes. And I think that's another thing that helps as you're going through the 20th of November, is the more clover you've got, the less drop off there is.
Yeah, right. Fibre, you said you use fibre. How do you feed that in? Is it straw, or how does that work?
Yeah, occasionally. It's been a bit of a premium fibre at the moment, or has been the last couple of years. There hasn't been a lot of hay around, but hay's really good. Yeah, hay's got a lot of bite, and especially through the winter, a lot of time with feet and that sort of thing, you're trying to, a lot of the things that happen in cows, it happens 3 months earlier when you get the issues. So, yeah, the dry off time, hay has a lot of bite in it, and I think it's magic for feeding it through the winter time, early spring.
Yeah.
But this year we had some of the guys that I know here were amazed, because we count the amount of cuds, chews for each cud. So even though we had massively long grass with heaps of clover, and the quality was amazing, and there were seed heads, the cows were still chewing under, they were sort of under 50, they were sort of early 40s. And that's a sign of high quality feed going in. So optimum is between 50 and 60 chews per cud. That's where you want a cow to be. And you can sit out in the paddock and count them. And that sort of defines whether you need to put in fibre, have a hay source. And the other thing is you get bubbles in the shits as well, which is an indication you need more effective fibre. So it's quite a handy thing when you're out there. If cows aren't chewing, you'll find you'll have unhealthy and, you'll have feet problems, no doubt. But it's an effective way to tell you if you need more fibre going in.
Yeah, that's really good. Real good, actually. Just generally on your animal health, what have you noticed the changes in your animal health, or costs, but probably more, cases of maybe mastitis, lameness, whatever.
Yeah, it's been easier. We've actually gone to a 10 and 7 milking system now. We started that middle of November. Yeah, middle. Just the cows were getting slower, and because we'd had a fair bit of rain. So we went to 10 milkings and 7. So for Monday, Wednesday and Friday, we do 2 milkings. And then on Tuesday, Thursday and Sunday, we just start at 8:30 and do 1 milking. And on Sunday, it's 11:30. So I think the drop-off is around 4 to 5%. That's on the drop-off from last season. So, but the cows are happy, and I'm hoping for a higher in-calf rate as well. So, so our in-calf rates have been really amazing this last couple of years. So, in-calf rates for last year were 9% for 10 weeks mating. That was just milking twice a day right through to February. That was last season. We did twice a day all the way to February, and then went once a day. The 2 years prior to that, we actually went once a day for 3 weeks. It was the first 2 weeks before mating and the first week of mating, and we had amazing, short mating, or a lot of cows and calf in the first 6 weeks. And that's another tool if people are having problems getting cows and calf. 3 weeks once a day around mating time helps develop the egg and get cows and calf. So the other thing I've noticed as well, I think it's quite, our mastitis has dropped way. We're sort of sitting mid 50s. Yeah, we're around 50,000. We've been down as low as 42,000 for somatic cells. Yeah, we haven't gone over 75, I think, this year so far.
Do you think part of that is having that concrete to avoid mud?
I think the dry spring has helped, but also, we're normally sitting low hundreds. Average for the last couple of seasons have been, 105,000 for the season. But
Yeah.
this year's dramatically different, and I don't know if it's the longer pasture or cows chewing, or it might have been from not having any rain in the autumn and spring, maybe.
That's extremely low.
Yeah, and it's been easy to keep there. Like, we've only had to strip the cows lately, just to, once a week, and we've just had a little bit of a niggle with I've only got 2 cows with mastitis at the moment, but it's been pretty easy. We haven't had many cows with mastitis at all this season, and
Yeah.
the feed issues have just been stones between claws, just with the races breaking up a little bit with the rain. But we've got a couple of areas that need a little bit of work, that are a little bit steep as to the cow shed, and I think some of that's come from those areas.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, I'm amazed. I never thought I'd be going down this way, because I was always a heavy topper, really topping, and yeah, I'm amazed. Like, shifting the cows a lot, the cows just increase milk production, and it's an easy way to keep quality because you're driving intake. Yeah. I still, it was the hardest thing to do was probably trying it the very first time. So I only put, I did about 20 hectares of the farm on the very first round and started trying the system. And those paddocks, they amazed me, because the cows didn't drop as I went into them, even though it looked like they should.
What time of year was that?
That was from September last year. I mean, I think I met you and went to one of your courses end of August.
Yep.
And then by the time we hit October, I was playing with some paddocks. And by the time we hit middle of November, December, I had the whole farm on it. So a big one for doing little trials on your own farm. Do half paddocks, or you don't put the whole farm on a system when you're trying, because you can have big, sometimes you don't know if you're achieving or but I look at milk production as a telltale sign of if the system's working. So you can go into, and the cows were happier. Cows were instantly happy going into, this system, impact grazing, putting a lot of pressure. And this year, those first paddocks that I started grazing, the clover has been unbelievable. Massive clover. So to me, I think that's probably a telltale sign of what's happening under the soil.
Yeah, fixing nitrogen for you for free.
Yeah, it is. And I don't think a lot of it, the clovers are actually quite selfish when it comes to nitrogen. They take a lot for themselves first. So you've got to, and the other thing I've been watching with our foliar feeding, I try not to use much nitrogen, but I do watch what's happening with the nodules. So
yeah,
over the years, you put some granular fert on, and you'll see those nodules go from red to white and be really unhealthy. And you know that the clover's given up fixing nitrogen straight away. So
now, when we were there at your field day, you were pointing out some pretty massive nodules. Sometimes you can hardly see them with the naked eye, but yours are quite big and healthy looking.
Yeah, so with our foliar feeding, like, I'll put boron on, 3 kilos of boron through September, because that also helps. Arden used to say that there's a little gateway between the plant and the root system, and that allows sugars to go down to the plant as the sunlight goes down. There's a little door.
Well, is that according to soil tests? Because I know it's quite dear. Do you just apply it to the paddocks that seem to be deficient, or how do you do it?
We do it as a round, knowing that, I've done soil tests, but I mean, they're not showing as being really deficient. But I think a little and often is the way to go. But in the spring, you know, when you got moisture and you got warmth and everything's growing, because we're foliar feeding, we can put on 3 kilos to every plant. Every plant's getting a little bit of boron, rather than running borax where you can, you know, if you put on 5 kilos or 7 kilos of borax across the whole farm, you'll find that each plant's missing out because the granules are miles away. Not every plant's getting some.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, are you using any molly or anything like that as well for feeding your clovers?
say again?
Are you using any molly?
No, because our pH has come up from, you know, we were sort of low, or you know, we were about 5.9 when we first started pH.
Right.
But as pH is lifted, you know, now we're sort of an average of 6.5 to 7. Molly's gone through the roof. It's almost, it's when you look at the table on where things become available. If you look at the pH of all the elements, as you get over, you know, 6.3, 6.5, you find a whole heap of minerals become available, and that's what's happened with molly. It's gone through the roof. So we won't be putting on anything for a while.
Nice. Are you basically following the cows with your toe and foot, or are you just sort of, you know, as the soil's needed, or have you got a process there? Or?
And we just, because we need 50 hectares a week gets foliar fed. So yeah, it's only 2 loads. So it's just part of the routine these days. Is we can mix it up and leave it in our machine for a day, or the next day. We don't have to put the pressure on ourselves to have it all out in one day. But because
what are you mainly putting in that mix?
In the mix at the moment,
yeah,
we use calcium nitrate from the start of October. So that's calcium nitrate, 15 kilos, 15 litres of fish, and fulvic acid. So we use fulvic, a carbon source, with every time we do anything with nitrogen. We'll put a carbon source in, because that attaches to, you know, the nitrogen and makes things stable. It chelates it. And there's a lot of people, you know, there's a few there out there. Some of the main fertilizer companies will have every reason why you shouldn't put, you know, extra carbon in, but we've seen, you know, for us, we can see it makes it stable. We can put nitrogen on 2 or 3 days later after it's been liquefied, and you still get a massive response from nitrogen. So
when you apply nitrogen, how much nitrogen are you using? Like just 20 kg urea, 10 of the N sort of thing, is it? Or
yeah, so we've only been using 3 from October through to end of November, but now we're just putting on 9 units just through now. So 9 units of N. What's that? 20 kilos of urea is what we're putting on at the moment, and 5 kilos of MAP tech grade phosphate, which we couldn't put in with the calcium because it reacts. So we're just putting a little bit of feed of phosphate, even though we're probably shouldn't, with what the soil's wanting. Apparently, you know, if you don't put phosphate on, the fungi will make available phosphate, but I just put a little bit on.
right, no, fair enough. Yeah, we're sort of just 10 of the N and doing the phosphate as well. So look, it's very interesting.
So using the tech grade phosphate?
Yeah, we're just using MOP. So yeah, and and just for a time first. So it's our first season with it. So we're pretty new to it here.
You'll see massive changes. Phosphate, you can see when you haven't put it in. But I think the colder months are probably the most important time to put the phosphate in. I think you need warm soil for phosphate to be available, just like magnesium. Yeah, so anyway, through the winter time, you get a massive response from putting a bit of MAP on the tech grade, and you just got to try half paddocks and see what it changes, and doing little trials. But we've been putting MAP on for 12 years probably, and massive.
Are you putting on potassium?
No, not using a lot of potassium at all. We try and move our effluent irrigator around most of the farm. And one thing I forgot to note, when you're putting on lime and you're trying to balance soils, if you put on calcium, you'll release heaps of potassium. So you've got to be a little bit careful when you put lime on. You're balancing the the calcium to magnesium, but you also be aware that you can release a lot of potassium at the same time. So you want to balance the potassium with some salt. So with a tow and fert, if we're pushing potassium, we'll put on 10 kilos of salt every second round, just to try and balance that K. Yeah, so yeah, soils, balancing soils, and then once you get air into them, then you can start, playing, I think, with the fungi.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what you've done there is just amazing, and I think we have a lot of similar problems with our soil structure, things like that. So just fantastic.
Yep. So don't hesitate to try a bit of fish, even some half paddocks in the autumn. I think autumn's a good time to put fish on. I think it does a lot of growing. It sort of sets the soil up for the spring. So do some half paddocks and then have a dig and see what's happening.
Yeah, we have used a bit in the past, and we're down here at Belpui for a whacker, so we're not far off south, and so the transport's pretty good. So
yeah, you're not too far away. So
no, not at all.
Every foliar feed I'm putting at the moment, while we've got moisture, I'm putting 5 litres on. So instead of putting it on in big hits, I think I'll just put it on 5 litres per tow and fert, or every foliar application, put 5 litres on while you got moisture. And I think it also holds it on the plant and slows the fertilizer running to the base. So I think we're getting a foliar response from this foliar feeding, but I think a lot of it actually runs down the plant and sits at the base of the root zone. So it's been really efficient. So you're getting a foliar, but I think putting on the fish helps hold it on the leaf for a little. It's like a sticker almost, holds it on. Yeah. So yeah.
Awesome.
Very
You're not using any molasses as well, free tow and fert, or?
No, I probably should be. We're trying to make things easy for ourselves, but yeah, a litre of molasses, I think it's always a good thing. We used it back years ago, but I haven't used a lot in the last while. We try and hopefully we're using or getting a lot of sugar coming through the plant into the root zone.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, good one.
Yep.
So Dan, did you have any questions?
Hang on.
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
No, I was a bit late getting in, sorry. So I've just been listening. You're right.
Okay. And what about Hamish Belsky? I don't know if you're still on. He might not still be there. What about Rick? I think Rick has a question about the soil carbon. Are you still there, Rick?
Yes, I'm still here. Yeah, great stuff, Hamish. It's really interesting. A couple of things. I've always been interested in herbage testing, and I didn't know if you did that, and if you did, what time of year you might do it. And the other thing I was interested in is your changes of your organic matter through your soil testing over time, please.
Okay. Yep. I'll start with the carbon or the soil organic matter. So we made big changes early on when we started going to balancing soil. So we went from 3% to 8% within probably about 3 or 4 years.
Can you say that again?
We went from 3% to 8% in
Wow,
about 3 or 4 years.
that's huge.
Yeah, massive. So because we've done some testing with Abron with Paul Smith, and it was just astonishing how quickly you can move things. That was doing soil testing down 800 millimeters, and we're going to put some more of them in this year. He's coming on we'll put another 3 or 4 sites on and hopefully get some money back from some extra carbon in the soil, but you got to start somewhere. So we'll do.
Send a bill to the government.
Yeah. So what was the other one? What was the other question? Sorry.
It's about herbage testing. Do you use that very often?
Yeah, we do. So that's probably one of our main tools. We do soil testing. I've actually been doing a third of the farm a year to try and correct each paddock. So trying to get around the farm every 3 years to balance soils, because that's been one of the aims. But at the same time, we do visual soil assessments with Outgrow they've got a whole rack and it counts grass grubs and bricks and how much clover there was. So we've been doing that each time as well as a herbage on each one of those soil samples for the paddock. So it's amazing the difference. It says you got heaps in the soil, but it's not available to the plant. So we will look at that, and then we'll put on some trace elements or whatever we need to correct that at certain times of the year. But yeah, I think
the other thing I was interested, have you ever used dried kelp? Sometimes we're chasing iodine in the soil. There is a way of doing it, using it as a tea bag in your sprayer.
Yep. So last year I put 1 kilo on of kelp flour.
Yep.
It doesn't really dissolve that well in my sprayer very well. I've got to let it soak and really isolate it with the stirrer. It's not the easy thing for me to put in, but I quite like some of the seaweed products that they do use.
Okay.
Yeah, there might be some easier forms, but yeah, last year I put another kilo on. I hadn't used kelp for a very long time, but Outgrow still had a few bags, enough to do 1.5 times around the farm. So
okay.
So
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's enough I've used.
Okay.
What was the other question? One more, wasn't there?
I think that was the two.
Okay.
There's a limit today.
Yeah, but thank you, Hamish. We're a little over an hour now, and I just want to be mindful of the time of year for people.
Are you there, Siobhan?
Hamish, you've unmuted yourself. Did you have any questions? Because
no. The questions have been awesome, so they've covered. No, sorry, I was on the phone before. But,
no worries.
Oh, great presentation. Thanks, Hamish, and awesome questions from obviously being a dairy farmer. They know what to ask, and also a good one from you, Rick. So, no, thanks, Siobhan. Wonderful.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and special thanks to Hamish for sharing all his farmer wisdom. And I think for too long, us farmers have been listening to the scientists who work for companies that are trying to sell something to gain our knowledge. And now's our chance to teach each other as we're on our regenerative journey. So yeah, it's been really good. I've learned so much up in Hawke's Bay, amazing farmers up there, just like there are down here. And I learn so much every day, even on the farm with Rick. Our learning is just on an hourly basis, pretty much learning something. So thank you, everybody.
One more thing in there, Siobhan. I think
yes.
One old boss told me you got to think like a cow. So just observations on reading cows and what they're doing in the pack. Spend some time with your stock, and quite often you learn a lot just by watching. And thinking like a cow or thinking like an animal sometimes is a good way to be. And
one thing for me, of course, the livestock taught me, but also just the act of doing the grazing planning taught me a lot about what my pastures needed, what different recoveries they need for different times of the year, and how that changes over the season. And once I was on the plan, my farm really started teaching me a lot more, because I was more observant, because I had to be minding my target residuals and leaving something behind and making sure I had recovered grass ahead. So just that training myself to observe started teaching me so much about the farm. So hopefully it will for you too.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thanks, Hamish.